Her daughter sees her stabbed multiple times and has to identify that that is in fact her mother. Hi friends, welcome. I'm so excited. Welcome to episode 2 of Sunday Scaries, my new series where together you and I sit down and get over that pre-Monday panic by going over true crime stories, eerie mysteries, and all things spooky. Quick warning, this episode has the same trigger warnings as the first episode. If you are uncomfortable with themes of essay and violence and murder, this is not going to be the case for you. But make sure you come back next week for Sunday Scaries because we will be going over a mysterious disappearance. So while it's still kind of messed up, it's going to be a lot lighter of a conversation. We are just going to jump right into things today. So if you haven't seen part 1, you definitely have to go watch that first, or you're going to be very confused and very lost. The reason that I made this video into 2 parts is because when people think of Lawrence Singleton, they think about Mary Vincent, which is totally valid because her case is absolutely insane. What happened to her is atrocious and absolutely mind-boggling. However, so many people forget about Singleton's second victim, which is Roxanne Hayes. What Lawrence Singleton did to Mary Vincent and his second victim, Roxanne Hayes, actually made really big waves with the justice system and caused so much public outrage that there is now the Singleton Law, and we are going to go over that towards the end of the video. But before that, we are going to talk about Roxanne Hayes. After Singleton was released on good behavior, he was supposed to be rehabilitated and safe to be released back in society after what he did to Mary Vincent. Whoever made that call, hopefully fired. Singleton had no plans at all to return to society and be a normal member of the community. In fact, he was simply just waiting to be released so that he could go on to do what he did to his next victim, Roxanne Hayes. We're going to jump into a little bit about Roxanne Hayes because the sad and unfortunate thing, and this was also said by her kids and her partner, is when you think about Lawrence Singleton, you really only know about Mary Vincent and nobody really knows about Roxanne, and they kind of believe it to be because she was a sex worker. People just don't place high importance on sex workers that come across bad situations. They really wish that more was known about Roxanne because she was much more than just a sex worker that got herself into a bad situation. So Roxanne Hayes had a pretty tough childhood. She grew up being abused by her grandfather, unfortunately. Despite having a pretty crap childhood and upbringing, she did manage to graduate high school. She graduated from Hillsbury High School in 1984, despite having a really rough childhood with very little support. And this is when Roxanne had her very first daughter. So unfortunately, after having her first daughter, Roxanne did develop a drug addiction and she really struggled with substance abuse for years to come. She was actually also charged with possession in 1986 and did spend some time in prison. In 1988, Roxanne was released from prison and got to return home to her daughter, who at this point was now 3 years old. Roxanne is out of prison. She's back taking care of her 3-year-old daughter, and she's really just trying to find a way to do that and take care of her daughter because although she had a drug addiction, she was a great mother. Like, everybody who knew Roxanne would say that despite her problems, she really did put her kids first and was constantly trying to make sure that they had everything they needed. Roxanne really tried various jobs when she was released from prison, one of which was a bookkeeper position. However, she was forced to quit when she had unwanted sexual advances placed on her by her boss. Shocking? I think not. After struggling to find a stable job and good income, Roxanne did end up resorting to sex work, and this is something that she did for quite a while, and actually where she would meet her next partner. In 1988, while Roxanne is doing her job, she ends up meeting a man named Clifford, who offers to give her a ride home because she is exhausted after working, and they end up actually bonding, and she actually stays a few days at Clifford's sister's house. This is where they eventually fall in love and end up having 2 kids together, both of which are adorable little boys. In 1966, Clifford ends up actually getting in a really bad car accident, which stops him from being able to work. So now it's just Roxanne that is taking care of not only her and Clifford, but her daughter and their 2 sons. Roxanne is still doing sex work. This is how she is managing to take care of everybody. I'm including a little bit more about Roxanne here because I read an interview with her partner where he kind of just explains that he really wishes that when people heard about Roxanne in this case, they knew a little bit more about her as a mother and as a person, because so many people hear that she was a sex worker and kind of just assume that there's nothing more to her, which is obviously not the case. Regardless of what kind of work you do, you're still a human being. In this interview with her partner, he states that Roxanne really was a fantastic mother, and on top of being the sole provider for their family, she would also read them bedtime stories every single night when she came home from work. She would take them to the park really frequently, and she would always make sure to make their birthdays extremely special for them. Her daughter's teacher actually even mentioned Roxanne being a great mother and a super supportive parent who never missed any of her daughter's school events. Unfortunately, this is where things take a really tragic turn in Roxanne's life and her kid's life. It's 1997, and 31-year-old mother of 3, Roxanne Hayes, does not return home. This is not normal, so her partner Clifford is immediately concerned and spends the entire evening searching for her. The next morning is when Clifford and their 3 kids get the worst news they could possibly get. Roxanne has been stabbed to death by a client. The saddest part of what I am about to tell you is that her oldest, her daughter, is actually the one who has to identify her mother's body. And so her daughter sees her stabbed multiple times and has to identify that that is in fact her mother. I really cannot, I'm not sure why it was her that is the one who identified Roxanne. I do think that that is something Clifford should have done, because I can only imagine how traumatizing that was for an 11-year-old, but alas, she is the one who identified her mother's body, which is fucked up on so many levels, and something I highly doubt that that little girl will ever forget, recover from, move on from, and so forth. As we know, Singleton has recently been released on good behavior, and couldn't tell you why. Singleton moves back to Tampa, where he is originally from, and unfortunately where Roxanne Hayes is living. On the 19th of February in 1997, a house painter that was working on Singleton's house drops by completely unannounced. He is basically outside of Singleton's house and doesn't hear, like, nobody comes to the door when he's knocking on the door, so he's kind of like, okay, whatever. But then he hears like this whimpering, okay? He takes a peek through the window and he says that what he witnesses is something he will never be able to forget and something that will always stay with him. When he looks in the window, he sees a woman on the couch that is kind of like slouched over, and Singleton is on top of her, stabbing her multiple times. Singleton looks at him through the window, like they make eye contact, and this painter basically runs for his life and calls the police. The woman, of course, was Roxanne Hayes, and so it was later discovered that Roxanne made the, a very unfortunate decision to go back to Singleton's house with him as a paying client. Remember, Roxanne Hayes is a sex worker, and she's just trying to take care of her kids and her family. When Singleton is caught, his reasoning for this is that she was trying to steal his wallet from him, and he was having none of that, so he stabbed her to death, as one does. Please explain to me how, in what world is that, justified? Like, did he think that the police were gonna be like, oh, no, for sure, yeah, no, that? Totally valid. Totally valid. Don't let that bitch steal your wallet. Roxanne was pronounced dead at the scene. And it was said that Roxanne was awake for the entire attack and felt every single time that he stabbed her. I can't imagine those being your last moments and how absolutely petrifying and terrifying that situation would have been. Like, you just know that she was thinking about her 3 kids in like her final moments, and just, oh, it makes me sick to my stomach. It makes me sick to my stomach. Like, that's a mother. That was a mother that was just doing what she needed to get done to take care of her kids and be the good mother that she was. Cut to Singleton's trial, where they're going over, you know, what he had done to Roxanne Hayes. This is where Mary Vincent comes in. Let's not forget, Miss Mary is alive. Miss Mary is alive and well. She's a baddie, and she lived through that, and she's actually thriving. Okay, so let's talk about Miss Mary for a second. Not only did Mary Vincent go to her own trial, look him in the eye, and identify him, but she went to Roxanne Hayes' trial. Okay? What a baddie. So at Roxanne Hayes' trial, he was actually sentenced to life in prison. Thank God. And it's so unfortunate, but this is exactly what should have happened the first time around when he did what he did to poor Mary. Mary probably felt like very thankful that she got to be there and remind everybody what he did to her. And, you know, it obviously swayed his sentencing to have Mary there and walk everybody through exactly what he did to her when they were deciding what his sentence was going to be. Unfortunately, he ended up dying in 2001. He didn't live out his lifetime sentence, and I think that is truly so unfortunate, because this man should have rotted slowly in prison, and I think that him dying really gave him the easy way out. At the end of the day, he finally did get the sentence that he deserved. Let's go into why he didn't get this type of sentence to begin with after what he did to Mary. Allow me to put something into perspective for you that is going to literally either blow your mind or make you absolutely furious, or a little bit of both. So Singleton was sentenced to the maximum allotted time for his crimes, which was 14 years. Why is that the maximum? Another man, Timothy Jackson, was sentenced to life in prison for stealing a jacket from a convenience store. So at the time, this all really came down to the different sentencing laws, parole policies, and systematic injustices. When Singleton attacked Mary, the laws were surprisingly lenient for this type of crime. So the reason that this poor man was sentenced to life in prison for stealing a petty jacket that was under $200 and Singleton was sentenced to 14 years came down to the 3-strike law, which created harsher sentences for nonviolent crimes. Basically meaning that anybody who was a repeat offender for petty crimes was punished more aggressively. Timothy Jackson, who stole a jacket that was $159, was sentenced to life in prison because he already had previous offenses that were also minor, but it was part of this 3-strike law. There's obviously more to this, like racism and class bias. This man who stole a jacket was a black man, whereas Lawrence Singleton, surprise, middle-class white man. Basically, Lawrence Singleton, middle-class white man, had never done anything like this before. He gets 14 years. It was wildly lenient for violent crimes, whereas this man, Timothy, he has committed similar nonviolent crimes before, including theft. So when he was caught for stealing this jacket, he fell under that 3-strike law, which is crazy. And so life in prison, no parole, life in prison for stealing a jacket because he had stole something in the past, whereas Singleton, 14 years. Everybody else also thought this was crazy, and there was so much public outrage about what happened to Mary, and then double that because of what happened to Roxanne, that the laws were actually changed, and a law came into place called Singleton's Law. Singleton's Law changed rules for violent crimes in many states. Thank God. And although it was too late for Mary Vincent and Roxanne Hayes, things would at least be different moving forward with violent criminals. Different states implemented different versions of Singleton's Law. States increased the mandatory minimum time for violent crimes like essay or murder. sentences for violent crimes became longer and also became non-negotiable. And before, prisoners could be released for things like good behavior, which is exactly what Singleton did. And Singleton's law prevents that. Some states also implemented a 2-strike or 1-strike law, meaning that a second violent crime could lead to death. It means that had these laws been in place already when Singleton did what he did, he never would have been released for prison after what he did to Mary, and Roxanne would still be alive with her 3 kids and her partner. After what happened to Roxanne Hayes, her daughter said, "I don't think my mom should have died. I just don't understand why. She was a great mother to me and my brothers, and she was a great wife to my father. She did what she had to do to take care of her kids." And that is so heartbreaking. So this is coming from the daughter who actually had to identify her mother's body. And it's so sad because she clearly is living with this like absolute confusion about why, like why her mother, like out of all the, I don't know, just I can't even, it makes me so sad, it makes me sick to my stomach, I don't know. In interviews with Roxanne's partner and husband Clifford, he stated that he really doesn't think that Roxanne would have been upset with her killer, and she would have been very forgiving towards him. Mary Vincent is now a great artist, and in an interview, Mary states that she feels like she is in her 3rd phase of life. The first was a victim, the second was a survivor, and now she is living as an artist. So Mary is a badass, and Roxanne was more than just a sex worker, was a phenomenal mother, and deserves to be remembered as such. It is so unfortunate though that like these types of things have to happen before appropriate laws are put in place. Like the fact that this wasn't already the way that these offenders were being handled is absolutely insane to me. Absolutely insane case. I knew that this was one that I wanted to cover for my very first Sunday Scaries, and I'm really glad that I did it in 2 parts. I think it was really important for Mary to have her story, and I do think it was just as important for Roxanne to have her story told as well, considering she's kind of a forgotten about victim, and I don't think she should be. Like, it, if anything, it's even more insane because what happened to Mary was tragic and unfortunate, but had Singleton been placed in prison and given the sentence he was deserved, Roxanne would still be here. So it really was like this true injustice that Roxanne was given, and it's great that now there's Singleton's law and things are different, but it's so sad to think that if things were the way they are now, then this would have never happened to Roxanne. And Mary would have been given a lot more security knowing that her attacker was in prison for the rest of his life or was given the death penalty, not like completely on edge because Singleton had threatened to finish the job and then is released 8 years later. Like, for both of these girls, the law really just did not have their back. I am going to leave a link where you can check out some of Mary's art and support her. And I'm also going to leave a link where you can leave virtual flowers for Roxanne.